Okay. So, Feeding Bristol. We began as a charity in 2018. Some of you may be familiar with. Oh, wait a second. Did everybody get the recording sign? Good. Okay, because it suddenly just started transcribing, which I didn't expect, and now I can see all my words popping up. Let me get rid of that. Right. So, Feeding Bristol began as a charity in 2018. It was some of you may be familiar with the Feeding Britain white paper that came out in, I think it was the back end of 2014. So that came out and it was really kind of highlighting food insecurity, which many people, many academics certainly have been doing a lot of work in for quite some time, but it really kind of brought it to the, if you like, the political agenda to be discussed for the first time seriously. And as a consequence, that led to the 8 different pilot charities or programs happening around the UK over the next few years, of which Bristol was one of the original pilots. So the charity was kind of started in 2018 around the focus of the Healthy Holidays program. So this has now evolved into the Holiday and Activity Food Fund, which in Bristol is known as the Your Holiday Hub. And the idea was, or the concept was, it identified that we had lots of children. Obviously, I think in Bristol at the time it was around about 18 to 19,000 back then in 2018, and there were all these children who are eligible for free school meal vouchers, and out of term time during the school holidays, they're not, the families, the households, they're not getting any support for food. So Feeding Bristol, in the absence of any funding at the time, raised funds around the city from corporates and public donations to go towards the Healthy Holidays program, working very closely with both FareShare Southwest and the Playful Bristol in the youth sector to put on activities around the city in areas of high deprivation, and also providing food to those activities as well. Now, that happened for 2018, it happened in 2019, and then coming up to 2020 when the preparation was happening, some of you may recall a little thing called COVID came along, and that kind of changed things quite drastically. So the city, or the country, obviously went to lockdown, and food support was a really massive issue. So Feeding Bristol did quite a lot of strategic work, kind of started looking a little bit more holistically at food insecurity across the city as a consequence, to help support, work with the city council, work with public health teams, but also working with lots of other hospitality groups, charity groups across the city to kind of coordinate the response. Now, we learned a lot over COVID on many different levels. We learned a lot, I think, nationally, globally, around food insecurity and the way it impacts lots of groups in many different ways. So whilst beforehand a lot of focus around food insecurity was around children and vulnerable households, we learned very quickly that a lot of the areas around disabled people, if people from refugees and asylum seekers, from different cultural backgrounds, there was a lot of different factors affecting how people were experiencing food insecurity, and how perhaps response or also provision and support needed to evolve as a consequence. And that really kind of set the stall for how Feeding Bristol has evolved over the last few years. So we're still a very young charity. It's only 2025. We're just coming up to our 7th birthday, if my maths is right, and actually our work has evolved to kind of based around a couple of fairly large projects, but also a lot of smaller projects that happen around the city as well. And our 2 kind of main projects are the Children's Kitchen, which is a project that was started through funding through the National Lottery, which is building on work that the chef Joe Ingleby, who some of you may be familiar with, just drop in that she won the BBC Chef of the Year award back in 2015, I believe, for her work in Redcliffe, and that work that she did in early years in Redcliffe, we helped to kind of expand across the city. So that happened for 2020 and 2021 as part of some National Lottery funding. Project was so successful, and we very much didn't want it to stop, so we found other ways to fund it, and we've continued that work since then, working with Bristol Early Years across early year settings in areas of high deprivation. And it's about not so much about cooking with children although that is an element, but actually it's more about how you create positive experiences with young people at that very formative age of between 2 and 4 years old. So they touch, they feel, they play with food, they get to grow food. We put planting beds in the area, and there's some very soft food education that goes with that as well. Alongside that, the main point of the project is to teach practitioners within those settings how to run this themselves. So we don't want to be working within these early year settings year in, year out. The idea is that we go and do intensive year with them. We train the practitioners in those early year settings, then we take a step back and we provide kind of ad hoc support afterwards as we go to a new setting and keep moving around. So that's one of our main projects. And the other main project, which came out the Going for Gold, the Bristol Sustainable City Going for Gold Award that we achieved in 20, and I say we as Bristol achieved in 2021, was the Food Equality Strategy and Action Plan. So food equality was a theme for the Going for Gold work that happened between 2016 and 2021, which Feeding Bristol led on. And the food equality strategy started during that period, the concept of what it might be, and it was completed in 2022. It was a massive project that involved over 90 different stakeholders across the city, as well as various conversations with lots of communities of interest around how people with lived experience were having issues and the kind of problems that they were having around access to food and education across the city. And that led to the production of the strategy, the vision, the One City Food Equality Strategy and Action Plan, and then also the action plan that happened a year later. So in 2023, the action plan was launched. So whilst that isn't our main piece of work, and it's a piece of work that we support the City Council, the public health team in delivering, it does chime very strongly with a lot of our aims and our missions as an organization. So a lot of the work that we do is very strongly linked into the food equality strategy and action plan in the city. So those are kind of like the two big areas. Alongside that, we work very collaboratively across the city. We are a small charity with only 4 people working for us full time, and then we have a couple of people that work to support the Children's Kitchen project on a very part-time basis. So we are a small charity. We can only do so much between the team. So we do work very collaboratively with community organizations, anchor organizations, as well as various stakeholders, corporates we do have some work with, but we also work very strongly with the city council, as I mentioned, the public health team, the communities team, as well as also working with academics as well. So we work with both universities on research and impact analysis. I know Patricia is in the room here today as well. We've done some work with Patricia when she was at University of Bristol in the past, but we do continue to look at that because we recognise there's a journey that goes from work that happens on the ground to how you turn that into policies, how you can implement change in the food system. We also work, with the integrated care board as well. So it's looking about how do we tackle the health inequalities that are driven by the food system. So it's really important that you can take work that's happening, get the evidence, turn that evidence into impact, turn that impact into policies, turn that policies into things that will actually help to change the food system, both on a local, a regional, and a national level. So alongside that, there's a few little kind of ad hoc projects that pop up that we try to lead on, or we try to bring funding into the city for. And a couple of examples of these are work that's going on at the moment. We've got there's a food disaster risk planning work that we're doing. That's a collaborative project with Bristol Food Network and both the universities, and it's about looking at essentially going back and looking at COVID and what happened over COVID, but then also how do we then react to any disasters in the future, and how do we make ourselves resilient as a city to create a plan that says, okay, this happens, it's a flood, it's drought, it's another pandemic, this is what we need to do, this is who we need to support, these are the structures that we need to have in place to be able to deal with it. So that's an example of one of the projects that's going on at the moment, and that feeds into both local government, but also will be looking to feed into national work as well that Professor Tim Lang is leading. You may be aware he wrote a famous book called Feeding Britain actually a few years ago, but also through the Feeding Britain network nationally. We're also doing some work on on creating a food education charter for the city as well. So again, that's in collaboration with schools across the city, as well as adventure playgrounds. So it's not just about what happens in school and term time. It's also looking at breakfast clubs. It's also looking at after school clubs as well, and we're working with the University of Bristol on that, and the idea is that we'll be able to create a food education charter that we can get the city to sign up to, and again we will look to pass that on a national level as well. We've got a couple of little projects that have sort of had an initial phase, but are looking to go to next phase of funding, and one of those is looking at culturally appropriate food across the city. So again, during the COVID pandemic, we became very aware of how food support perhaps wasn't as appropriate for all communities in the city as it could be or should be, and that led to wider conversations around how do we support people around culturally appropriate diets in the city and access to food. So this is twofold. We're looking at both the growing element, so how do we look to diversify the food that's grown in the local area? What is the market that's there? Do local growers have the appetite to learn how to grow more culturally appropriate foods for different communities? And then how do you find those routes to market? But then also on the flip side, looking at the access of this food. So we recognise that in some areas of the city, it can be quite easy to access the foods that you need. Let's say in more diverse areas like in Easton, St Mark's, St Mark's Road, you can find a lot of different access to many different types of foods there. However, as we see the city demographics change over a period, Bristol is a city of sanctuary. We've seen a lot of refugees and asylum seekers come into the city. What you can find is certainly some of the, as you go out the city centre, those areas are changing in the makeup, and as a consequence, there are a lot of communities, a lot of groups of people in these different areas that have to travel all across the city just to access the food they need. So how do we tackle those issues? So that's an example of an ongoing project as well at the moment that we're looking to get some more funding to promote. And another big project that goes on is our kind of food justice network. So again, this is something that Feeding Bristol lead on, but it is a collaborative effort. We have a couple of sessions around the year, which we bring community groups together to. It's a very kind of loose food justice network, and the idea is that we have conversations in this space around how do we support each other better, how do we build better resilience between the work we're doing, or sometimes it's just about sharing some of the work that's going on, and it's just an opportunity for groups to come together to recognise what's happening and how do we create stronger links for better resilience and support across the city. That kind of culminates in Food Justice Fortnight, which happens every year in June, and that's a 2-week sort of series of events across the city that looks at celebrating really the kind of the work that goes on in the communities and the community groups that are doing that work. So it's often based in the areas of high deprivation that we're working in already. It's really based around trying to get people that live in that local area to come along and find out about what's happening, to see perhaps the things they didn't know were on their doorstep. And it always has a theme, and this year's theme, for example, is going to be around food and power. So looking at kind of like how food can both enable and empower people, but also how it can be used as oppression for lots of people, and that ties very strongly into our themes around food justice that Feeding Bristol work around. So there we go. That's a bit of a real kind of, that's both a bit of a plotted history of Feeding Bristol and also a little bit of example of some of the kind of projects that we're involved in. I mentioned earlier that we have a very small team, and that kind of team is designed to reflect the kind of work streams that we try to, or that we are pursuing. And very kind of broadly, that's based into education, which Jo leads. She's our head of food education, and she leads the children's kitchen, but also very much looks at all elements of education that kind of comes straight through her as our lead point. We look at research and development of projects, and Dr. Lucy Tordo-Gillingham, she leads on that work for us, and that's all about really kind of looking strategically across the city, also nationally what's going on, what projects will be really interesting to bring into the city, how can we support new projects and research, how do we look at policy, how do we change it, links to the academics, etc. That all comes through Lucy. And then we have Mally Evans, and she leads up the she's head of engagement and advocacy for Feeding Bristol. So that's she kind of food justice network and the Food Justice Fortnight fall within her remit, but also looking at how do we communicate, how do we use language, how do we talk about people, involve people on the journey, how do we advocate for communities, how do we make sure they've got a voice, how are we bringing that on the journey, how do we sense check what we're doing at all points, what does our communication strategy look like. that's a really important element of how we work, because actually we recognize as an organization it can be very easy to fall into kind of not see the wood for the trees sometimes, maybe, or to get very focused on one thing without really kind of looking at the broader picture and how people are being engaged with, and ultimately building equity into this food system is what we're trying to do. Working towards food justice, that's what food justice is all about. And we recognize very much so that we have a food system that has been created what we might say for a group of people by a group of people, and that was perhaps I mean, if we're really going to dig into it, rooted into kind of colonial times, and how the food system itself has evolved and been intensified and industrialized over the years. But really, it's just not fit for purpose. And if we're going to be able to create something better, everybody has to be involved in that, and we really have to recognize those that suffer the most as a consequence of our current system. Otherwise, we'll just end up making the same mistakes in anything that we develop in the future. So all these three kind of main strands really interlink with each other. So the food education, the engagement and advocacy, the research and development, they're not siloed parts of how we work. They all interlink. There's lots of grey areas between, which makes things incredibly fun for us to pull apart sometimes. But it's a really important part of how we work as a team and how we integrate as a team. So a lot more of this information is on our website if you've not had a chance to have a look. If you haven't had a chance to look, I'm going to really quickly share my screen just to show you what the website does look like. There's a lot of really good information on here, and I've rather conveniently, let's refresh that page, got us on our guiding principles page, which I just wanted to touch on as well. So this kind of really outlines who we are as an organization and how we try to strive to be and how we choose to work. I really strongly recommend that you do go away and have a look at this if you haven't had a chance to look at this yet. It's really important. This is an area that we're developing a lot at the moment. Like I said, we are a young charity, and we are looking to evolve and constantly better ourselves. But it gives a really good idea of where we're going and what we're trying to be as an organization. So please do go on there and have a look. And this ties very strongly into a lot of the elements of like EDI that we're looking at as an organization. I mentioned like kind of equity earlier. ED&I principles, diversity principles, they're really important to us as an organization, and they really sit at the heart of everything that we do as an organization. So these guiding principles, we feel, sum it up very nicely, and the way that we do try to work. But please do go on there and have a look and have a read about it. You'll have a chance shortly to ask me or Anna anything about these as well, anything you have read. Along here as well, it gives you a bit of an idea about Food Justice Fortnight and what's happened in the past, a little bit about some of our projects that we work with in the city, a little bit about the kind of support that's available in the city, and then on the resources page, there's all sorts of different things there that we upload onto our page that you can have a look at, including the food equality strategy and the action plan and the progress report from last year. And we will also load this video up into there at the end of this session as well, or by tomorrow morning at least. So, I've just rambled at you guys a lot. So I'm glad I got all that off my chest. I'm going to pass over to Anna now, who's going to give a bit of a view as a trustee, as a founding mother, and a little bit about like kind of what governance is, what it's like to be a trustee, and a little bit about the evolution. Like I said, she's been there from the beginning, longer than I've been there, so she can give you a bit of an idea of how things are going and where we're going to.
That's not a reflection on my age compared to yours, I'm hoping, Pen. You've been there for a long time. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I really sort of appreciate it's probably sort of cut into your days a bit. So thank you so much for the interest with that. And I'm sort of, yeah, just assuming really that your interest, the reason you've joined this call or had a look at the website and connected is because some things appeal to you about Feeding Bristol, and it might be that you've got an interest in that through some kind of lived experience, through perhaps the work that you do, maybe through some things that you've come across in another voluntary role. I think probably all of us as trustees have found that there's some kind of connection that all of us have had for some reason. For me, as Ped said, it was I was kind of involved in the early days in this sort of evolution of Feeding Bristol. I was a councillor for Bristol City Council at the time, and the ward that Ellie in my bottom left of my screen is representing now. It's nice to see you, Ellie. And in Hillfields in Fishponds, and I was also the cabinet lead for education. And so a group of us kind of got together because following on from that paper that Ped mentioned that had really highlighted huge issues around hunger and child poverty. I'm also a teacher, a primary school teacher, and seeing that sort of firsthand, getting worse and worse as sort of austerity hit, seeing the sort of practicality of that. And even though I worked in a school and I've been a teacher for over 20 years, it did need to be spelt out to me that the children that were perhaps having their only hot meal a day during term time weren't eating at other times during the year, and certainly weren't eating properly. I also sort of saw as a counsellor things like children coming to holiday clubs that were sometimes being run with no food, and if food wasn't provided, what that looked like for them. So felt sort of quite driven to do something about that. And I mean, I won't recap too much more because Ped's covered all that off, but obviously things have evolved quite a lot since then. We were a CIC originally and then became a charity fairly early on because of being able to apply for more grants, and just our sort of funding sort of was better as an established charity. In terms of as a trustee, very much in the early days, which has changed a lot now, we did a lot of practical support. So in the early, there were, summers that myself and others drove food round to different holiday schemes. We were involved in very practical fundraising. One of our trustees, who's a solicitor, ran, funding mornings. There was no HAF fund at that time, holiday activity food fund at that time. So we were sort of involved in some quite practical things. It's very much changed to much more of a sort of supportive role. Practical support is always welcome. There have been moments where we've kind of all mucked in with things at different times. Particularly sort of Food Justice Fortnight is a great sort of event for people to come along to different parts of. But it's much more pure kind of governance advisory sort of role there that you might expect in this kind of role anyway. In terms of the sort of, I mean, my first question, if I'm ever sort of asked to do something or be thinking about doing something, is what does that look like on my time commitment? And not my first question perhaps, but one of my first questions. But so we meet about, and Ped, correct me, so I was just trying to think how often are our meetings. Board meetings about once a month, slightly less. Once every 2 months. Obviously,
it's about
more.
5. It feels like more because you enjoy them so much and love to go.
I do enjoy them so much.
Yeah, it's five board meetings a year normally.
Oh yeah, much less than once a month.
Yeah, it was just we had a bit of a backlog recently.
We had a few, didn't we, recently together. And we've kind of fairly recently in the last year or so moved towards everybody being on a committee. So as you sort of join the board, you'll also join one of the committees that sit under that. We can give you more details of that. I won't run through all of it now, but for example, Finance and Remuneration Committee, Education Committee. So there's various sort of parts to that which completely depend on skill set really of what your experience is, what you feel comfortable offering. Nobody will be sort of forced to join something that they don't feel is appropriate for them, or that they don't, they feel they could offer something else sort of better. If you're interested in joining, and once we've gone through that sort of process, for anybody who's then a new board member, we will have a sort of mentoring set up so that you'd work alongside an existing board member. That can be very flexible who that is. It might be somebody that you have had some similar experience to, or it might be somebody that you're interested in learning a bit more about their skill set. Just so that they can kind of walk through it all with you, perhaps go through some board papers with you. There's, as you know, when you sort of often new in something, there's a lot of abbreviations and things that take a little bit of time to get to know. So we'd very much sort of encourage you to be thinking about not necessarily, am I perfect for a role that some people have been doing since day one, but can I contribute something to where the charity is now, and what could I grow in as part of that as well. In terms of what sort of, other than those kind of practical, turning up to board meetings, I'd say that the key things, and it was interesting for me to reflect on this, thinking about what I was saying to you. I would say that one of the really important things about the charity is that we have and I'm not just saying this because Ped's here, but we have an incredible staff, but a small set of staff. So getting to know them is really important. Getting kind of alongside them when new people have joined, we've sort of often tried to just make time to have like coffees individually as trustees with them. It's not just a kind of social thing, although it is really nice when we've kind of socialized together, but actually it gives you a real insight into, because it's a small staff, what their workload's looking like. There are moments of can be quite pressured, obviously, when it's, you know, doing so much for a big city, and it's important as trustees that we keep an eye on that, their well-being and their sort of what's going on for them. And just various things around this sort of sustainability of how things are working. You know, it's part of our job as trustees to sort of spot things where we think, actually, do we need another member of staff in there? Do we need to shift things around? If somebody's, for example, going on maternity leave, how is that going to be managed? It's sort of looking after the staff and making sure that the charity is running well with the staff that we've got, and whether we need to change anything around that. It's the sort of, in terms of the skill set, I mean, it's so varied in our current trustees, and I'm sure it will be from sort of everybody who's kind of showing an interest at the moment. The only kind of key thing, I guess, that you need to be prepared to do is just to sort of think about offering constructive challenge, and not just nodding through board papers, but sort of thinking, actually, is there something that we need to think again about this? Whatever background you come from, is there something that has maybe been not thought about that you might be aware of that other people might not? And that might be, you know, sort of, for me, that's sometimes been around viewing things through the eyes of kind of education and children. For other people, it might be viewing that through the eyes of a particular community. Through it, for some people, you know, if it might be viewing it from quite a legal perspective. So it's whatever you kind of are bringing, really. And there's nothing that is excluded from that. We sort of always really encourage like constructive challenge, to ask questions, to give a view, particularly where there might be some, you know, decision making going on that PED sort of brought to us. The other thing I found sort of really important, I mean, and this is a kind of just, it sort of happens naturally, but you've obviously got to really care and think that food justice is important. Know that it's something that causes huge suffering, but can cause huge freedom for people when they are well fed and know where their next meal is coming from. And more than that, the work I think we are saying we kind of had in our very early days is that we should be able to kind of do ourselves out of a job, that we don't want to be another kind of big food bank, but we should be actually sort of serving Bristol to move people out of food poverty, looking at the root causes and how that can be sustainably managed in the future. And where our sort of growth as a charity has all been around food justice and getting that sort of accessibility long term. And when PED touched on, for example, the children's kitchen, it's not about children coming along and being fed. It's about training communities in the longevity of how you feed your children healthily, what are the barriers to that, and how you support families and the wider community in doing that. It's very much not about something being given to people without that kind of sustainable exchange. So your kind of role as a trustee, I guess, is, I mean, if it's not too strong a word, is almost to be a bit of an ambassador for that line of work and for charity. To, if you see in other work that you're doing, I mean, an example I had sort of recently, I've been volunteering the summer holidays at a week's like club for children, like a sort of fairly cheap funded club for children, like a play scheme type thing. And there was no food provided, and I immediately see that as a barrier. I know that's it from the work that, you know, we've done through Feeding Bristol and other work that I've done, that is a barrier. So it's, if you're in other areas of your life, to be able to sort of say, have you thought about food and how that could be funded, and let me find out a bit more about that for you. So it's kind of about also taking some of the things that you might well learn from Feeding Bristol and the team there, about how, you know, how that can then go into other sort of areas of your work, perhaps in your life. And, you know, and the other thing Ped's touched on as well, but just to reiterate from the point of view of the board, that there is a real commitment to equality and inclusion and diversity. It has been, Feeding Bristol grew very quickly, and we've deliberately spent a significant amount of time thinking about that, wanting to improve the diversity of our board, and we've done a lot of sort of various training things on that. We've put in a sort of section so that every meeting we check on whether we feel like we've covered off all our sort of EDI checklists that we need to. Is there anything that needs to be discussed further? But really, the heart of what the charity is about is diversity and justice for all people. And so our board does need to reflect that, both in terms of practical sense, in terms of who's on the board, but also just in terms of each of us individually, our attitudes and the challenges that we give, where we're sort of spotting something that we might have missed. I mean, Ped gave that really clear example about, we can provide food. We've got methods that we can provide food across the city, but there was a time where that wasn't culturally appropriate. And so it's those kind of sort of attitude changes that we sort of need to see in the sort of food system in Bristol. But I mean, I want to leave some time for questions and things. So I just want to really end by saying I think it's, and I'm not just saying this because I was involved in the setup, because I don't feel like, I feel now it's in such a sort of different place anyway than our sort of fledgling space there, but it is an incredible charity. We've got exceptional staff. I think probably the most useful thing I did was Ped's interview, probably, in appointing him, because he has been incredible. I'm involved in a few different things, and governors of schools and a few different charitable things. And you leave Feeding Bristol board meetings feeling overwhelmingly positive. They are, which is not always the case. Some of you might be aware of if you sat on anything like that before. You always leave feeling you are better informed as a result of it, of the staff coming and sort of reporting back on things that have happened, on hearing things from other trustees. Challenges are welcomed. It's a really positive environment for that. You will feel you can absolutely share your views, ask questions. Nothing will seem too silly or innocent. And it's something that, I'm just really proud to be involved with. And I think sort of, even in the past my time of being on it, I think I will sort of always look back and think I was really, really glad to have been involved in it. I'm going to stop there on that positive note.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks a lot. So we will stop there, take a big pause for any questions that have been mounting up. So if anyone has any questions, now is a good time to ask them.
Hi. My name's Claire Herbert Golden, and I don't work at the moment, but I used to, until recently, I was working in the city council in anti-poverty work and EDI kind of related to work. And so I'm very interested in that aspect of it, but not solely in that. And I was just wondering, it is quite challenging, isn't it, to sometimes to connect with some communities and find the right ways in. It was interesting during COVID, I think, when there was a big partnership meeting every week or two, which included people from local communities and talked about issues like how to the different rates of people getting vaccinated, for example, and think about how could you how could you encourage people in, particularly in some ethnic minority communities, people were more cautious. And it was interesting. It made me realise how little I understood why that would be the case. But that network was quite good. And I was wondering, at the moment, how do you connect with perhaps different? I understand you connect with sort of disadvantaged communities, but do you have ways of particular partners you connect with in different the communities that are more ethnically diverse than others?
A good question. So in short, yes, I think I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect, everything that we do or what we've achieved, but I think what we learned over the years, or certainly since I've been at Feeding Bristol for 4.5 years now, since 2020, and it really is, we had spent a lot of time building a lot of trust. That's where it started, going out there and meeting people, having conversations, really getting time to understand the issue, and then follow it up with actual actions to support those groups. And so there's trust that's built on delivery of promises, I suppose, and that's kind of forms the basis for a lot of the relationships that we developed. And I see Lisa and Jazz both here, who are both from organisations that we work with in different areas of the city, but we work with wider networks like Black Southwest Network. We have connections into them for some groups. We'll work on locality basis with different groups, depending if it's let's say, working with the disabled community, we might work a little bit more strongly through organisations like Bristol Disability and Equalities Forum or Wessel. We'll have links into working with more, localised groups like Eastside Community Trust within, like, Easton obviously is a very diverse area in Easton, or up at Lockleys, with working through the adventure playground there, and we work kind of more directly with those groups, or if it's in particular other communities of interest, like working with refugees and asylum seekers, then we have connections through Refugee Women of Bristol, through Layla, or through Borderlands, or through 91 Ways to Build a Global City. We work very closely with them on a lot of projects as well, or it could be through working with the Wild Goose Cafe or the Homeless Forum as well. So we kind of try to cover a lot of bases, both through strategic groups that exist in those areas, but also working very directly with groups that are on the ground and building the trust with them. And then, like I said, is about sometimes just following through on the promises and the support that you try to give, and that's how we build the foundation for how we move forward.
And Ped, on that, something I've noticed that the staff are really good at is if they don't fit, if, for example, when there's been pieces of research that that have been that we've commissioned to take place. There was something about a year ago, I think it was to do with refugee or asylum seekers, and a decision was made amongst the staff that it wasn't actually particularly appropriate for that member of staff to do that research, and there needed to be somebody community based to do that. And that's been an observation I've just had as a trustee on towards the staff, that they are very self-aware of actually they won't get best feedback necessarily if they're not somebody who's actually maybe in that community, and they're not afraid to say, actually, I'm going to hand that over. They're not kind of holding things so tightly so that they're actually getting a kind of skewed view through sort of interviewing people. There's a definite, really deep understanding of the need for sort of lived and currently lived experience.
Thanks,
so yeah, I just think sort of, being aware of what you can't do, what your limits are, and who you can work within the community to sort of reach people.
And that kind of speaks to the collaboration and co-production approach that we take as well. Shada, I think you've got your hand up next.
Yeah, hiya. Thank you very much for that. It was a really good overview. It really helped me visualize how things sort of pulled together, because I've read their website, and that was really informative. Thank you. I just wondered, like, I was quite surprised that like you've only got 4 full-time, 2 part-time staff, and obviously that must be a challenge in itself. But I'm just wondering, in terms of priorities for the organization, challenges that you're currently sort of working through, or that sort of are consistently sort of coming your way, how would you place them? And is, like, do you have, like, you obviously have volunteers, but does that help support some of those, like, resource challenges, or how do you manage those sorts of things as well? So 2 questions, sorry.
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so in terms of the resource side of things, I'll start with that one, and because it's the last one you said and it's on my mind. But it's we actually don't work with that many volunteers, surprisingly enough. So I think our work is quite strategic in its delivery. So we're not so much on the ground. We've got the Children's Kitchen project, which is in itself quite a specialist skill set anyway. But we don't do. It's not so easy just to get a random volunteer, but like to invite someone on board and say, hey, come along, help us with this, because actually having a deep understanding of some of the issues that we're doing, it's not so easy to get there. And actually, we're still wrestling with this as an organization. It's a bit like, where does volunteering sit? Is it right? Is it a bit, actually, is there a level of privilege and entitlement with volunteering? Those who can do, but those who don't, can't afford to. And therefore, actually, is that fair? So if we do work with people, it's very much, how can we ensure that if we're going to work and partner with people, we can afford to pay them for that work, especially if you're looking at kind of, work that is quite mentally or emotionally taxing and requires specific skill sets. So so we don't have so much in terms of volunteering. There is a couple of little bits. There's a couple of people who support and have historically supported around Food Justice Fortnights. They come every year just to help with a bit of the organising, but they also actually bring a specialist skill set from the organisation they work with. We work with this year we're working with a social media company, for example, pro bono support, just around, because we just don't have the resource to do kind of outreach and communications to help ensure it's getting the coverage it needs. But I think that kind of goes back to the thing of how do we collaborate and partner in the city. So it's very much that thing of who do we need to work with? How do we partner with them? How do we empower people within those organizations? It's about that almost that kind of one city approach that I think has been really positive impact on Bristol, of saying like how how is the collective, the sum of our parts is better than the individual parts, and how do we work better as a city to achieve stuff so we don't have to do everything. We have close partners in Bristol Food Network, for example, around the Bristol Good Food 2030 work, and how do we make sure that everything's all aligning there? How do we work with organizations, be it in Easton or Hartcliffe or Lockleys? We have those partnerships that means that we can have the meetings, the discussions. We can see where we can do collaborative funding bids in together. We can share knowledge, share experience, and make sure communication and knowledge sharing and information passing is really integral to what we do. So I think that's a big part of how we manage the resource. I think we also do have to be very aware of what we can and cannot do, and we do a lot more work now around our planning over the whole course of the year. What's our capacity? Where are our pinch points? Where are our points where we've got more time to take on more work? When projects do come along, potential projects, we do assess them now and say, is this for us? Like Anna was saying, is it for someone else? Can we give it to another partner who might be able to do it better? It's not just about, oh look, there's a bit of money and there's some fun, there's a project, let's do it. It's very much like, actually, are we the best to deliver that? If we are the best to deliver it, what else do we have to move aside? If is that a priority, and etc. So that there's lots of questions constantly happening as these things evolve, and it's around sometimes what's the need that we're seeing in the city. So I suppose come back to your point around the priorities, it's very much what is a very prescient need that we're hearing back from conversations that we're having in the cities. What are the things that we're seeing, relating that back to, let's say, the food equality action plan, and seeing what are the areas where there's lots of stuff going on at the moment. We don't need to help that, we don't need to propagate that further, it's happening already. What are the areas where we're not seeing enough happening on the things that need to change? Because ultimately it's, if you spend too much time focusing on one area, let's say creating food clubs, for example, then you're not looking at all the other areas that need to drive and support that or change. Where's the skills and education element going? Where's the access to growing going, or the access to local produce? Where are the stakeholders coming in from the different areas? So we try to look around and see where are the gaps in the work that's going on in the city. Where do we need to put our focus time to help kind of bring those up to the same level? Because if we can push everything at the same time, that's when we're going to see proper holistic change that will have a much better impact on overall, these kind of like health inequalities that we experience. Well, both the health inequalities we experience based on the food system, but also there's an environmental aspect to it as well. I think we're all probably quite aware and mildly anxious of the way that this planet is crumbling in on itself due to the impacts of humans. So that forms another element of what we're very aware of as well. So does that answer the question? I haven't given very specific examples, I know, Shada, but it is sort of like a constantly evolving conversation.
Something that an example I saw really early on was when we were, this is years ago, and it is a bit sort of school holiday focused, but it is just a good example of this, is that if Feeding Bristol just tried to man all the cover for children being fed during the summer holidays, for example, with just our staff, A, we wouldn't be able to do it, but B, people wouldn't necessarily want to come. Children wouldn't necessarily want to come to something branded as this is a thing where you're going to get free food. Like there's some, something about the dignity of that. And what we found immediately was, as soon as we were supporting football clubs and art projects, so many different things across the city, actually the number of people that would engage with it increased. So it works both ways. So it is something definitely as trustees we are always mindful. That's why I mentioned it about what's the workload like, what are we asking our staff to do, and what does that look like, and where is there things they're having to say no to that we don't really want them to say no to? Do we need to increase capacity? That's part of the sort of governance role there. But also that were we asking staff to run all these things, it wouldn't be healthy for them, but it also probably wouldn't work, because we wouldn't have we want people that are already community leaders in different parts of the city to be the people able to then work well in those in those particular environments, can actually bring about much longer term change, because they're in those environments anyway. That even if we had a staff of like 200, it still wouldn't necessarily be that they're the right people if they're not they're not within those communities and able to make that like long-term change.
No, that does make sense. Thank you very much.
Patricia, you got your hand up there.
Sorry, I just took a moment to undo my mute. Done the right thing. Thank you so much. Yeah, it sort of probably builds from that a little bit. So one of the things I couldn't quite get from looking at the information, and it does speak to the kind of size of the organisation, and also for an organisation that does that gluing together work for other organisations, which I think is really, really important, and also crucial to what you said in the beginning about, you know, if you work in the kind of food insecurity and food poverty space, what you should be thinking about is planning for a future where you're not needed. But I was wondering, what I wasn't quite clear about is how your financing and that side of the resourcing model works. And I wondered, as trustees, I know that you're also looking for somebody who has a particular responsibility around finances, but I just wondered if you could say a bit about how the funding model works and how important keeping an eye on that side of the responsibilities and the governance of the organisation is. That makes sense.
Good question. So so I'll start with where the funding comes from, and that is it's quite a diverse stream of funding. So we don't rely on just one source to fund us all throughout the year. It costs about, to deliver the work that we do for the core staff plus also the children's kitchen project, it's around about £270,000 a year. Okay, so that's kind of like our funding gap that we've got to plug every year, and that comes through a multitude of different ways. We have some work that is funded through Bristol City Council, so we get a contribution for some of the work around the food equality strategy and action plan. We get some funding, a small amount of funding towards the children's kitchen for the work in the state-run earlier settings, and then there's also some money that comes in from the work that we do around the Your Holiday Hub, both on the strategic level but also on the delivery of the children's kitchen for the Your Holiday Hub as well. So there is some funding that comes through that. That funding actually works out around about between, depending year on year, depending on the work, it can be between sort of a quarter to a fifth of our funding gap, but it does vary a little bit. And then we get a lot of donations coming in. So we do get like public donations through our website. That's not so much, but we do get quite a lot of corporate donations that we've had from relationships that have been developed over the year. And I say that's probably accounts from somewhere again between that quarter and a fifth of funding that comes through. So it could be around about sort of half our funding comes through those two streams. And then there is some ad hoc funding that comes through writing to trusts and grant funding bodies. We'll do like maybe like a letter to some groups every now and then, and little bits of money seem, if we do that every few years, and little bits of money and checks seem to arrive in the post, sometimes very randomly from time to time, which is also always much appreciated. So those kind of other donations probably come to somewhere around about another fifth of money that comes in on an annual basis, and then there's the rest of it's kind of made up of different kind of projects that we get involved in as well. So there can be some ad hoc projects like the food disaster risk planning work, like the culturally appropriate food work, could be like the shaping places for healthier lives, working a little bit there as well for some of the support that we do either on a strategic or a delivery level of some of that. So those kind of make up the rest of it that comes in. So it's quite a diversified team. So we don't overly rely on one element or another, and that means that if an element, is a little bit insecure, I know we've got a councillor and someone from Bristol City Council here today, but also like sometimes you don't know where that funding's going. There can be some elements where finances have been, you may be aware, a little bit tight over the last few years, and that's a national trend, not just a Bristol trend. So we're always thinking where is the next funding going to come from. So that kind of takes me on to how we manage that. As director of a charity, obviously it's on the forefront of my mind as to where we're getting funding from and how we continue to support all the staff. We have four staff plus the 2 part-time that essentially we have a duty of care for. The last thing we ever want is to not be able to have these staff to do our work, but also we want to make sure we are paying appropriately as well, and for the roles they do, and also providing proper benefits and support to all staff as well. So these things are always on our mind. So the way our kind of financial policy works is, I think hopefully Anna would agree that thankfully we've got a director who's quite good on finances. So I'm able to manage the cash flow side of things, the budgeting side of things. I work with the auditors on annual audits. I'm not an accountant by trade, but I spent the last decade working within small social enterprises or finance or and therefore have got quite good knowledge on the numbers and how
Love
to
a
run
spreadsheet, don't you, Ped?
I
You love a really good
I
spreadsheet.
do love multi-layered spreadsheets for sure. So I would always produce up-to-date cash flows and these will break down into kind of where the money is or where the money's going or where the money's going to come from down the line, and we'll have a conversation around the level of percentage of security of that funding that's projected to come in. So we always work on trying to have around about 3 months reserve in the bank, like physical reserve actually in the bank, and then we say we want to have 6 months of knowing where the funding's coming from, which at first can sound a little precarious if you're new to the charity world, but that's actually, I think, quite a secure place to be in. Obviously now that's the minimum. We try to work a little bit more. We don't want to stockpile money as an organization, though. That's another thing that we're very aware of. So we won't try to go for funding unnecessarily. There have been times where I've turned down funding or not gone for funding that's available to us because I just don't think we need to go to it, tap it at the time. The time will come back to it to help do the work. And I think funders and people that we work with very much appreciate and recognize that. The idea is, how do we make sure money's going to the city? So we I write detailed annual budgets that will look at all the work, the core work that we're doing and where the funding is coming from. Ideally, I like to have an idea. I say we want 6 months worth of funding, but I'm always trying to make sure we've got 12 months worth of funding lined up. Where's it going to come from? Where are the likely sources? I don't want to be sitting there giving a budget that says we've only got 3 months worth of reserves and I'll work it out over the next 3 months, because that's too late. Those of you that are aware of grant funding processes know it takes a little bit of time to go through the churn of applying for a grant. Small grants can be quite fast. Larger grants can be difficult, and where possible we're trying to look at more multi-year funding as well for security for the work that's going on. So an example of this, unfortunately we were unsuccessful recently with a collaboration with both the universities, Public Health and Bristol Food Network, was around a UKRI, a UK Research and Innovation Fund, around tackling health inequalities driven by the food system. That was like a 1.8 million multi-year funding that would have sustained a portion of our work for the next 3 years. We were unsuccessful, unfortunately. It was a very competitive fund, but we do look on that sort of scale, as well as looking at the scale of saying, okay, an example again, we're working with Foundation for Children at the moment for work on Children's Kitchen in the south of the city, and that's £30,000 for this year, with a potential £30,000 to continue every year for that project. So that's just an example of the different levels of funding that come in. And then in terms of the board and looking for somebody with finance background on the board, ultimately it's a governance thing more than anything. It's not that, again, the board are feeling I say this, I don't think the board are feeling like oh my god, we have no idea what's going on with the funding. We think we've got a very good idea what's going on with the funding, but no, I think no one on the board actually at the moment has that financial knowledge to be able to properly challenge me on it. And I, like Anna said about challenge is very important. I always invite challenge. I don't like it when I don't get challenged, quite frankly. And I think it's really important that we have someone that can challenge the numbers and poke holes in the spreadsheets that I'm making and ask me questions that maybe someone who doesn't have a finance mind wouldn't be asking. So that's why we're looking for that element. It's not so much that we're concerned that we've got a deficit or we don't know where the money's come from. It's more governance and due diligence that we want to make sure, and our auditors are very strict on that as well, saying you need to get someone in to do this, and they're right, because over the last 2 years our actual turnover has gone over £1 million, predominantly because we're helping to distribute household support fund in the city. So that means that we get about £1 million comes in, pretty much £1 million goes back out. But it makes our turnover go over £1 million. So as a consequence, we get fully audited as well. So it's not just an independent examination, which means that every part of our systems and our processes get scrutinized by our auditors as well. So we want to make sure we've got appropriate governance on the board for that. We're running out of time. Hopefully, is everyone okay if we're running over a little bit here? I know we've just gone over 1 o'clock, and I appreciate some of you may need to leave. So if you do need to leave, that's fine. I said we're recording this, and we'll put this on online afterwards, so you can catch anything you do miss.
If you've joined us.
But I do, really appreciate the time you've had so far.
Thank
Those of
you.
you who have questions, hopefully we'll have time just to wrap them up now as well. So,
Just
Jude.
really
Oh, sorry.
quickly on the one other thing about finance is that we've not, I mean, I won't go into loads of detail now, but you'd be sort of surprised that there's quite a lot of funding streams we've never tapped into. There's lots of big grant bodies in Bristol that we've deliberately not gone to, so that they are always there as where we know there'll be reliable funding, because we know it's that whole thing of not, like Pez said, not going and asking for the sake of it, but for if there's a specific project that we're going to need funding for that doesn't come with its own funding, being able to go to funders that we haven't just kind of gone for the sake of it almost. So that's been a strategic decision, to not kind of over apply for grants really, where they're not needed.
Thanks, Hannah. Jude, sorry.
Hi, I think my question kind of sits quite neatly with the things you've just been talking about, because I'm very conscious of the fact that you're going out for trustees. By the way, I'd just like to say your organisation sounds amazing, absolutely amazing, really, really, really interesting things that you do. However, what I don't want to do is to give you an extra job to do, to sift through if I feel that I'm not going to offer you what you need. So I wondered whether you just explained about the finance. I'm not the finance person, telling you that. But are there any other kinds of skills gaps that you've actually identified that you're seeking to fill in the board at the moment?
Sure. So, so we did a bit of a skills audit recently on the board, and one of the areas that we're finance is the big one, because I think we just, from a governance perspective, that's a must. The other areas I say are sort of nice to have, but not necessary. So we're after a bit of extra support, I think, around ED&I work. That feels quite an important area to us. Like I said, it really sits at the heart of what we do. And again, there's training that we're going on or doing in particular, like within the team itself, to do stuff, and we will drive a lot of the work around that. But it's also it would be nice to have a bit of extra specialized support on the board. Not necessary, but that would be good. We probably have a limited level of lived or living experience of the issues on the board. Again, it's not a must-have, but it's a nice, it'd be great to have. But it again is not the be all and end all. Marketing and communications is an area that we're kind of growing more as an organization, trying to understand. We don't have a specific marketing and communications role. We're probably not the best at always shouting about all the work that we do, because we just kind of get our head down and just think there are things that we want to do, and that's there are many things that probably happen in the city that people don't realize that we're kind of helping to happen without us actually going around and shouting about it. Now, whether we want to shout about it, I don't know. We don't do this for that. So, but still having some support around those elements of how we approach marketing and communications would be quite useful, because I think there are that we're just putting together a communication strategy as an organization, which probably would have been done quicker had we had some expertise to help us. But because we don't have like a niche role for that, it's probably taken a little longer as a consequence. Anna, have I missed anywhere else that was on our list when we were doing that? I can't remember what we put on the. I think there was a couple of things on the website. Well, thanks, Liza.
I just think that we're looking for, certainly over the next sort of year or so, because there'll be a number of us that our sort of terms come up, so that it will be, it's not about recruiting sort of one person from a room actually, but potentially we haven't set a number on it actually, have we, Ped? So it could be one, it could be 3 or 4. So I would say definitely, like, I don't think anybody should sort of count themselves out from that, and it might be helpful to have a sort of one-to-one discussion if that's easier with me or somebody else on the board or Ped, that if there's a sort of, because what we haven't had today is time for everybody to say, here's my experience that I've had, and for us to say, actually, there's a real gap in that there isn't anyone that has that on the board at the moment, or that's something that certainly somebody does, but they won't be here for the next 10 years. Not that you have to commit for that long, but I think that it's definite. I would say, yeah, keep your sort of don't count yourself out from anything, sort of keep your options open with that. Some of it is about, I mean, obviously, there might be somebody who's an accountant and cannot come forward and offer that sort of advice. There might be people with lived experience who have actually lived that, or there may be that you've had some of those experiences through other things you've done, maybe through jobs or through volunteering or through some other governance role that you've had. It's not necessarily about something that it says on a kind of business CV. It may be that there are things that actually you have got experience of, and if we sort of chat to you a little bit more about what that might look like, you would see where there might be sort of a role that you could fit into, or otherwise. I mean, it's very much about kind of round peg, round hole. It won't be for everybody. But it may be that sort of with further kind of conversation, people feel it's not for me or it is for me. But yeah, I just say sort of, it's worth sort of bearing in mind that everybody on the board probably brings something maybe from their working life, something from their family life, perhaps something from their sort of, how they grew up, something from their experience of what community looks like, in different ways, and that comes up at sort of different times and different sort of ways we can sort of challenge and support.
Yeah, I think there's no. I think it's quite open, to be honest, as to who might come in. And like Anna said, we've lost a few board members over the last few years. We purposely didn't go out to hire because we were going through a bit of an evolution ourselves as an organisation, and we wanted to make sure we had a better understanding of ourselves and the structure that we were offering before we brought on new board members. And now we're at that point where we have vacancies for like 3 to 4 places right now, but also very conscious that, like Anna mentioned, that terms are coming to an end for other trustees, and therefore there's going to be more gaps. So I think this is going to be an annual cycle for us now, that we're going to be bringing people on, and that's kind of where you get to as a charity or a social enterprise after a while, when you know that people are coming in. You don't have one mass exodus of people at one point. You want to be able to stage it to plan succession as well, which is really important.
Yeah.
I don't know, Ellie, Sally, if either of you got any questions. Sally, I saw you had your hand up. I don't know if you answered what you were saying. Thanks, Jude.
Yeah, you've answered my question. Thank you, Ped. And I will have a conversation with you or Anna or both of you in the next few weeks. Thank you. It's been really interesting.
No worries.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. Council people.
Yeah, same here, guys. Thanks very much. It was a really thorough introduction, and I think the only thing I had was, I was just wondering what the other subgroups were. I know Anna mentioned finance and education, but I was just wondering if there are others, and also what the commitment would be for them in addition to the board meetings.
So we have 5 subgroups in total. There's finance, remuneration and fundraising. There's governance, people governance and HR. There is then the other 3 are based around our kind of work streams. So we've got education, research and development, and engagement and advocacy. So they're all designed to support the staff in their roles. All those meetings happen twice a year at the moment. We're in a little bit of a trial, suck it and see sort of first year of doing these committees, but we're just trying to find ways. What we're very conscious of, I think, is that, or what I became very conscious of perhaps, was that I don't want to be the source of all the information that goes to the board. I don't think that's healthy. If anything is going wrong, then they just have to listen. What I say is verbatim. And you know what, I could be terrible at my job and I could be just lying. And I've seen that happen in other charities, and I've seen the consequences of that. So to create a better governance structure, really more than anything, as well as support to the staff, we thought not only do we just invite board members to the odd meetings here and there, staff members to the odd meetings, here and there, board meetings. How do we create better information flow that goes between staff and board, that ensures that there's better governance happening, and it's not just the voice of PED that defines what is going on in the board here. So that's a really important part of doing. So as I said, it's 2 meetings a year for each subgroup, and we ask a board member to be on 2 subgroups minimum. So essentially you're looking at 4 meetings a year that are about an hour and a half, which will be for the subgroups, and then 5 meetings a year, which are for the board meeting. And then there's a bit of pre-reading for those groups as well. I tend to throw a load of papers at the boards for the board meetings, which can be a little bit overwhelming at times, but I do my best to identify what you do and do not need to read, and what's just there for information for you to read in your own time, if you like.
And the other thing that I found really helpful is that board meetings are in person, but with a phone in option. And sometimes everyone's there in person. Most of the time it's mixed. So some people it's just not practical for them to get into wherever we're meeting at the time. We try and vary the location of it so it makes it more accessible for people. Certainly the committees I'm on, we've done them all virtually, haven't we? And we set a date, but because they're small. So like the finance one there's 4 of us, and that was we did a bit of a poll, didn't we, over until we found a date. So it needs to be as close to the original date, but there's some flexibility around those as long as they're meeting in the right sort of section.
Yeah.
And I do think I just think sort of particularly for working parents, it's got to be a bit more accessible for anyone with an access issue getting somewhere. We have to do it like you just have to do it like that, because it's going to be, otherwise it cuts out too many people being able to be involved.
And
thank you. That was something I was going to ask, so thank you.
We do alongside that as well, and that's one of the things that we're looking at around kind of the EDI element is that we now have an EDI budget as well, a line in our budget every year. So we have funds that are available there to ensure that anybody that's engaging with us, or perhaps people on the board, have a fair chance to attend everything that's going on. So there is a budget that we can use to support people, especially those that may come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, if they want to engage with the board to help get to meetings or childcare, so we can have conversations around how we can support that as well. So that's again an important part of how we're developing elements of our organisation.
Lovely, thank you so much.
I think mention just sort of the next steps from here for those that are left, but obviously hopefully some people will pick this up online, is just that we'll have I think it's the end of this week, is it the 4th of April that the actual cut-off point is to get your application in. So it doesn't have to be like a massive oh my god, here's like a 1,000-word essay on why I need to be in Feeding Bristol. We want it to be an expression of interest, with a cover, a CV that says this. Again, don't have to spend hours on your CV, and then what we will do with all candidates that come through is we will look to have an informal or a very light touch conversation, where we'll get to, it'll probably be myself and the chair where possible, but also maybe Anna as well, and Chrissy, who's also one of our other board members, who's on this kind of subcommittee of hiring new board members in, that will find a time to come and meet you that's convenient for yourself. So it's not like we're going to say this is the day in this office block that you're going to have to come to and you're going to have an hour-and-a-half interview. It's going to be a little bit more softer than that, but we really just want to make sure that this is right for everyone. So we don't want people having the wrong expectation of what they might have coming on board, or what it is that they might be doing when they come on board, and we want to make sure that the fit's right as well. And that goes towards like why we've got the buddy system in place, and why maybe that you could come in 6 months later you think actually this isn't for me, and that's totally okay as well as we go through that process. This is about finding the right fit for everyone and everyone feeling comfortable within being part of this work in this organization.
And location for those kind of informal, formal, whatever we're calling it, chats, is also, we can be flexible with that, because we know that like you coming into a city centre location isn't for everyone. And people might feel more uncomfortable, less uncomfortable in certain settings. So there's no judgment on that at all, just whatever works for you guys, really.
Wow.
Thanks very much. It's been really helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you for giving up your time. You're all busy people, so really appreciate it.
Sorry, we ran over a little bit there, so thanks. Thanks for that. And I'll put the recording online and I'll send it around to everyone as well.
Yeah, and feel free to share my email or something, Ped, as well, if people want to get in touch as well.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well done, Ped.
Oh, let me just stop recording.
Don't record it.